All right. Tonight, a quest, and then don't forget the Thursday night, I think it is, you've got a report due, right? And that'll be it for till spring break. So, yeah. Yes. Okay. All right. Okay, your sister has a driving test. All right. All right. Cool. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for the privilege of meeting together today. We do pray for Izzy's sister. She does her driver's test today, and we all remember what that's like, and we pray that you give her calm. If it please you, she might be able to pass it and get her license. Lord, we thank you for the challenges of cultures as we shift gears now and kind of head into a different kind of study, but still very much related to what we've talked about, that you would give us the ability to understand, apply, and most of all to appreciate the richness of the gospel of Christ as it confronts a variety of cultural contexts. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, we're going to talk about something now that is called cultural clusters. So the basic difference is that the first part of the semester was devoted to cultural values. And those are values that every culture encounters in one way or another, okay? In fact, just as a way of review, let's see if we can list from memory the 10 values that we've just gone through. They don't have to be necessarily in order, but let's give it a try here. What would be one? Yeah. Okay, identity is actually the first one we did. Somebody else, another one. Time. All right, another one. Somebody else. Communication. Good, what else? Somebody different. Okay, risk. High and low risk. Uncertainty avoidance. Yeah, sorry. What else? Yeah, who said that? Yeah, power distance, right. Good. We're halfway there. Somebody hasn't responded yet. Everybody's got to get in one of the... Daniel or Ben, you got an idea there? Or Izzy? Sharon? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Expressiveness. Yep, but it involves emotion. Good. Okay, we're down to 4. Okay, all right, social norms, which was the last one we did. Tight versus loose. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yes, right. Yeah, cooperative versus competitive. Yep, good. Yep, that's it right there. Lifestyle, we called it. Yeah, what did we call the cooperative versus competitive? I don't even remember what we named that as the category. Oh, come on, help me out. What is the cooperative versus competitive labeled? I should know that after. What? Achievement, thank you. Yes. All right, there we go. All right, what do we got? 2 left? Okay, rules. All right. Universalist versus particularist. I think there's just one more. Well, somebody cheat and look. What do we got? Yeah, he did. Yep, emotion, yeah. I thought, we got that one too, right? High and low context. Somebody mentioned that? Yeah, same thing. High and low context, direct and indirect. They're both related to communication, yeah. We did that one. Authority, high and low power distance, what? Punctuality, time. Well, maybe we did get them all. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, just say I can't count. All right, we got them. Now, what we're going to do in this next section here is we're actually going to look at geographic clusters. And again, please understand that we're going to be horribly stereotypical. I mean, but at the same time, it's a legitimate study because there are common features. And what we're going to do, we're not going to study all 10 cultural values in each geographic cluster. There simply isn't time to do that. But certain clusters geographically are especially noteworthy for certain values. Does that make sense? So we'll highlight maybe 2 or 3 values in each cultural cluster just to kind of give you an idea as to how they size up. So basically what we're saying by putting these two together is that everybody expresses certain values, but certain clusters of the world tend to express common, cultural values or ways of expressing them. So that's where we're heading here. So in your notes, this is not in your notes, this will be review 2. Do you happen to remember, for sake of review, what the 4 types of anthropology are? We're studying one of them. So somebody do the easy one. Which one are we doing here? Cultural, woohoo, you got it. All right, cultural anthropology. So that's the easy one. Now, what are the other 3 kinds of anthropology that we can study that we don't in this class, but that exist? This was way back from like the first class period of the semester. Well, what are some other studies that you know of? Okay, yeah, it's related to historical anthropology. Here, archaeological, which deals with findings that has a lot to do with history of people, where they came from. Archaeology deals with the items, devices, the means by which people lived, okay? And then there's biological. That's where you get, the study in different ethnicities, physiological features of people. Mm-hmm. Now there's one more. Yeah? Well, there is. I mean, when we study systematic theology, one of them is anthropology, right? And sometimes we group anthropology and hamartiology together, sin and man, because they go so nicely together, unfortunately. But that's a little different. That's studying the spiritual aspect. And I mean, we could include that here legitimately. But there's one other one. I mean, what's one of the biggest marks of any culture? One of the first things that stands out in a cultural distinction from another culture. You go to another country, what's one of the first things you deal with? Language, linguistics, which is the 4th one down here. Right, those are the areas that are typically studied, but Sharon is exactly right. We could, as believers, put theological anthropology in there, even though it's not recognized out there. We certainly, and frankly, theology plugs into all of these. In other words, if you study all of these, you draw conclusions that we can analyze based on what the Bible says about the nature of man. Good. Yeah, none of these deal with the nature of man, if you notice. Archaeology, biology, linguistics, culture, they're talking about tangible things. And biblical anthropology deals with the spiritual side. All right, good. That's just review. All righty. Now, do you remember the story? Does anybody? I'm giving you some review here. I believe we told this story about the little boy in the classroom. Does anybody remember what we said? What that story was about? Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Has to be functioning how? Yeah. You're really close. What is the ultimate goal there in? Yes, yes. And so right now he's kind of not fitting in. Once he figures this out, now he smiles. Everybody else smiles. Everybody's happy, and he's fitting in again to the classroom. Yeah. Okay. And so this is the point. This is not just true of Japan, but a lot of countries. Just the Great Courses series included that story at this point, kind of introduced the idea of clusters, Japan and others like Japan that would show that kind of a thing. All right. So 2 questions come out of that clip, and here they're in your notes here. Why do Japanese systems promote struggle while the U.S. sees it as inferior intelligence? Do you understand what's happening there? When this little boy is up in front of the classroom, Americans might look at that and say, they're humiliating this poor kid because he's not as smart as the other kids in the class. So it all has to do with his inferior intelligence, and it's not fair to flaunt that in front of the whole class. You're humiliating him. But Japan and other countries like Japan don't see it that way. They're viewing this struggle that this kid's facing to fit in with the rest of the class as healthy and necessary in order to bring about social harmony. So people are sitting there thinking, man, they're humiliating this kid. They're thinking, come on, we're gonna bring him into the fold. We're gonna make him fit in with everybody else. It's a completely different mindset, right? And there are clusters in the world that emphasize that sort of thing. All right, and then the second question is, why do cultures do what they do? So when we look at these clusters, we're going to be asking the question, why is this group of nations or people groups like this? What makes them that way? And there's no way that we can really sound the depths of all these cultures. We just can't do it. Okay, all we can do is observe some characteristics. And then, if God leads some of you to one of these clusters of the world, then you will naturally go farther in your studies. That'll be your motivation, to take this a step farther. All right. So, number 3 in your notes, psychologists. Ask the following 2 questions. Now, we're going to contrast number 3, psychologists, and number 4, if you want to go ahead and fill in number 4 to get ahead, anthropologists. When out there in the world, there are 2 kinds of people, basically, that study cultures. Psychologists and anthropologists, okay? And a psychologist will ask, how do your beliefs, values, and assumptions influence the way you behave? Now, we would ask that question too. I'm just saying that psychologists are more the people that study what's inside of people, what makes them tick from inside. And then they would ask, how does your culture cause you to have those assumptions and beliefs? How does your culture cause you to have those assumptions and beliefs? So what psychologists are doing is they're saying, what's your contribution, the way you are to society, and conversely, what is society's contribution to you? Okay? Now, we as believers would ask those same 2 questions because everybody in this room is a product of both of those. What's inside of you has influenced your surroundings, but your surroundings have also influenced you, okay? And you guys have studied psychology, right? I mean, you've at least done intro to psych and counseling. Has anybody here ever had a psychology class besides the intro to psych and counseling? Okay. So what's the dominant theory out there regarding the way people are? What's responsible for that? Okay. So you just really mentioned 2 things. You mentioned kind of an internal thing, the genetic makeup, but you also mentioned external influences. Yeah. Okay? What do you mean by nature versus nurture? Okay. All right, good. So these are the two questions we're talking about here. And of course, and the other psychology classes that you had, were they secular or were they from a Christian standpoint? You've had both, okay, all right. So you can see the differences between them. Now, when it comes to an anthropologist, okay, anthropologists are not looking so much at that as they are the more tangible things. And they will ask, like, how do people survive? Did you ever stop to think about that? When you're studying a people group, one of the most fundamental questions to ask is, why is this people group still existing? You know? Give me an example of a people group in the world that, humanly speaking, should not exist today. Yeah. Yep. You look at Israel's history, who would have ever dreamed that in 1948, these people would become a nation? And then shortly thereafter, they'd have the fourth most powerful military in the world. So anthropologists scratch their heads over that one, you know. Some will say, well, it's a fluke, or, you know, just circumstances happen to work together. We have a different answer for that. Can you think of any other cultures that you wonder, how did they possibly make it? I don't know what other cultures you may have studied. But one of the questions we often ask is, you know, why is it these people survive? What is it that keeps them going throughout the decades and the centuries and the millennia? Another question that anthropologists ask is, what are the mechanisms these people have developed to cope with life in this environment? When you're studying a culture, you know, what is it that they use in order to deal with life? One of the cultures that is so amazing when it comes to survival is really the region of Russia and that part of the world. Not just Russia, but they have had to deal with so many military, political, and climatic issues that their survival is really an amazing story. And I'm not just talking about Russia, I'm talking about that entire part of the world, which, by the way, in our study is, I think, the largest geographic area that we'll study when we look. It's the biggest cluster that we'll look at, okay? All right. So, you know, what kinds of things do people use? Okay, so what happens is anthropologists have come up with cultural categories, as they call them. And they're things that they look for, the top things that they study. And when I say anthropologists, understand this isn't Christian versus non-Christian. This is just anybody that's an anthropologist will study these sorts of things, okay? And here are the categories. Well, okay, what's the number one? What do people need to live? Food, okay? Do you ever think about God sent you someplace to serve? You know, we're curious about food. We like to study the food, but have you ever stopped to ask the question, why do they eat this kind of food? What does this have to do with their existence, survival, getting along in society? We're gonna talk about we're gonna talk about chopsticks versus forks and spoons and knives. There's some interesting studies that have to do with the very utensils that people use and what they signify. Okay, fascinating study. All right. Just somebody give me an example of a country where just give me an example of a country where the diet is indicative of something very important about the people, what they do or don't eat. Yeah. Cows. Yeah, sacred cow idea, right? Which is where we get our expression, holy cow, you know? Right, because cows are considered sacred. And you drive down the streets of India, and cows may be meandering across the road, and nobody beeps at those cows. You let the cows go, and you work your way around them. I mean, fascinating things that have to do with food regarding the way people live. Okay, so hunting is more independent. If you're dealing with a culture where hunting is the normal way of getting food, then probably you're dealing with a culture where people have learned to get along more independently. There is such a thing as team or group hunting, okay? But by and large, when you study cultures, if people hunt for their food, they are probably a little bit more individualistic as opposed to people who farm. Because farming is normally indicative of a more collectivistic society. Now you say, well, doesn't it have to do with the terrain and all that? Sure, that's all tied in. But if the terrain or the climate there is more conducive to hunting and not so good for farming, then you'll probably find that the people tend to be a little bit more independent. Again, that's a very general statement. But these are the types of observations that people make when they're studying different geographic clusters. If the US is more individualistic, then you might ask, why do we have an agricultural background? We are considered to be the most individualistic country in the world, and yet our history is largely an agricultural history. How do you explain that if agriculture tends to be more characteristic of collectivism? Yeah. The Industrial Revolution, yeah. So was America always independent, or did we become independent or individualistic? Is there a time when we were more collectivistic than we are now? Good question. Go ahead. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we are blessed with abundant resources. I'm not saying that America was completely agricultural. You know, you have the picture of the pilgrims out hunting for food and stuff like that. Okay, I understand it. But as we settled into communities, you know, we became very agricultural. Interesting. And so that again, that reinforces why it's so important to study history. You know, what were we like? It really, really, really is important wherever you serve the Lord, wherever God takes you, to know something about the history of that place. Because if not, you will fail to see so much that's a part of who they are and why they do what they do. Yeah. Interesting. We have to look further back to that which was part of the survival code of our ancestors in Europe. So, hey, you're going to study why Americans are there. You can't even stop. You don't start with the Pilgrim's Landing at Plymouth Rock or in Jamestown. No. If you're going to understand what an American is, you have to go back to England. How many of you here come from? All of you. Let's see. How do I say this? How many of you, like within the last maybe 3 or 4 generations, have people that moved from Europe to this country? Yeah? From where? Okay. Germany, Holland? Yeah. All right. All right. Who else? Or just where you came from? Yeah. Okay. Poland. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Where did the rest of you come from? Sweden. All right. Great-great-grandma from Sweden. Germany. Spicy. Is that a German name? Oh. Yeah, where about you? Scotland. Okay, good. Czechoslovakia and Thailand. Interesting. Where else you from? Where you come from? What about your ancestors? Same thing. Czechoslovakia and, yeah, when you went like this, that's what I was wondering what you meant. Oh, I see. Czechoslovakia and Taiwan. All right. Anybody else remember where your roots are from? You guys are related. Who knows? If you go back far enough on Ancestry.com, pay the extra fee, they'll relate you to a king or a knight. No, I'm just kidding. Anybody else where your roots are from? Yeah. Germany. All right. Thailand and Laos. Neighbors. Daniel, do you know where your ancestors came from? Okay. Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? Mine are English, I think, on both sides. My dad was Lounsborough. My mother was Fosnaugh, Fosnaugh. Interesting, isn't it? Very similar to the ending of Lounsborough. Yeah, no, so one of these days, we talked about on our 40th, maybe taking a trip to England, trying to dig up our roots. Not literally, but. All right. So you really need to go back. And Isaac, you jokingly refer to yourself as a mutt, and we all get that. We're all a combination. Yeah. But it really does help. If you minister in a country that hasn't had that same kind of inter-ethnic, marriage and so forth, then your job isn't quite as complicated. Give me an example of a country where you would go that wouldn't have the same kind of mix that we find in our country. Yeah. 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 There'd be some, but not nearly as much. Another example. Yeah, Japan, an island nation for many years and didn't have the same interaction. So if you're ministering in a place like that, your job isn't as difficult as it is trying to understand Americans. Yeah. And even in Brazil, there's a ton of mixture there. We could easily divide Brazil up into 3 countries, South, Northeast, and the Amazon, and they would all be distinct. All right, good. So that's part of the challenge. So letter B is economics. How do people exchange goods with other people groups? Economics are as old as humanity. There have always been ways of people to exchange goods and services, whether it involves some sort of coinage or not is really a secondary question. But people have always had to deal with trading, and somebody has something that somebody else doesn't have and needs, so you trade. So economics is a very important study. Do you ever wonder, does anybody here happen to know where the word dollar comes from? Well, guess what? I don't either. Would somebody look it up really quick? I really don't know where the word dollar, what's the etymology of the word dollar? Somebody find out, let us know. Wouldn't you expect an American to know if you ask them, where's the word dollar from? Person or thing from the valley. So it goes back to England and then to Germany to figure it out. Interesting. Anybody else have something different than that? I've never thought of studying the etymology of the word dollar. I can tell you where the Brazilian real comes from. It means royal, and it's a currency that was developed, actually installed in 95. We had been in Brazil about 6 years, and they completely changed the currency. They had a cruzeiro and then a cruzado, then they changed it to the real plan, R-E-A-L, real, like royal. Yeah. Things like that are interesting. They shed some light. Anybody else come up with something on a dollar there, the difference than what Liz read?
Go even further back. Dollar, short for Dachas dollar, was a coin from the silver mine, whatever that place is, in the Czech Republic.
Czech Republic. Now, England, Germany, Czech Republic. Is that what you? Okay, same thing. Anybody else get something different than that? It's fascinating. Now, okay, I get it. Some of you love that type of stuff. Others of you probably can't stand the thought. Just, give me a dollar and forget it. But I love, anytime I confront a word that seems weird, I like to go to etymology.com and try to figure out where it came from. It just fascinates me. All right. My wife and I have been reading in the Old Testament about I mean, way back in Exodus and Leviticus are talking about the price of, the shekel, which is the price, the sanctuary price. And I looked at my wife and said, where did they come up with that? All of a sudden just appears, in the text, but I don't remember any place that explains where the idea of 6 grams of silver, being the equivalent of a shekel and the price of the sanctuary. Where did Israel get that idea from? I don't know. All right, so here's another one, offspring. How do people regenerate? Now, is that important? Is it important to study how a people group or a cluster of people understand the issue of offspring? Can you think of an example where that's a big deal? Yeah, now I don't know to what extent that is related to the only one child. I do know that the one child law, at least in some way, was connected to the population issue, okay? But what happened, and what we're hearing now, is that is causing a problem for China now because the age of the Chinese nation is a lot older than it used to be, and now they're dealing with the issue of what to do about that. Okay, now some of you may, I don't know if you've studied any more about that, but that's what I've been hearing, that the age of China now is becoming an issue. Yes. Right, right. Mhm. Uh-huh. And it has national implications. In our country, when I was just gotten married, we had, they had some really weird designations for couples, like yuppies. Okay, they had dinks, double income, no kids. They had, if you had more than 2 kids, you were irresponsible, like financially and so on. And I mean, and the whole idea of the man and the woman having their own professions, their own careers, made it very difficult to consider having a lot of kids. And the U.S. came to a point, I don't know where we are now, where we were very close to the point of not having enough regeneration in order to keep society moving along as it should, to be healthy. I'm not sure if we're still there or not. Maybe some of you have studied that. I'm just saying that the whole subject of offspring and the society's concept of having children and all of that is very important. It says a lot about what that cluster is like. Laws and government. So how many different kinds of government structures can we name? That's one. Okay, monarchy. All right, give me another one. By the way, even monarchy can be more, give me an example of another word that describes a monarchy, but maybe not in a really good way. Absolute monarchy, tyranny or totalitarianism, the idea that all the power rests in one person. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guy says it's interesting that when you talk about the relationship between Russia and the West, you'll hear somebody say something like the United States decided to, but you won't hear them say Russia decided to. They'll say Putin decided to. Because the decision isn't really with the people or even the other government officials within Russia. All the authority rests in Putin. What's Putin going to do? And the same guy said the only way you can really understand Putin is if you can get into his mind. That's how you'll understand Russia right now, at least not the Russian people, but what's going to happen, what Russia is going to do. It's centered in one person. Our country cannot go to war without a congressional declaration of war. So anyway, what's the other kind of government? Okay, and that Is there really any such thing as a pure democracy on earth? No, it would be mob rule. So we have kind of redefined, tweaked that a little bit. So give me an example of a type of democracy. There are two of them that you should be able to think of that kind of, one of them is not so much as the other. Okay, oh yeah, representative democracy, and we call ours a constitutional republic. Okay, so it's kind of, yeah. And give me another one. It would also be a democratic idea, but not a constitutional republic like ours. Parliamentary government, where you have a king usually, and then you have another, there's a relationship between a king and a ruling body, right? Like England and other places. So, look, wherever you're going, understand what the government is considered and ask why. Why are they that way? How does that influence the daily life of the people? How does that relate to religion? Okay? And all that's important. Okay. And then mobility is another interesting issue. How free are people in that region to move around? How do people move around? In America, you take a driver's test, and once you get your driver's license, next thing you want is a car. You know, so you try to come up with a few $1,000 to buy a car, right? There are other countries that's not even on their radar. I mean, in fact, it's not just in other countries. We went to visit New York City a few years ago. We were on one of these boat tours that took out to Ellis Island. We didn't actually get off on Ellis Island, but we went around there, and the guy was giving the tour. I was chatting with him near the end of the tour, and he said, yeah, you can tell foreigners in New York City because they have cars. So you see all these cars and, you know, all the traffic? He said, those aren't the people who live here. Those people come in here to work. People who live here can't afford a car. It's not that you can't afford a car, it's you can't afford the parking spot. It costs so much to park a car that it's not worth it to buy a car. And so, you know, New Yorkers, true New Yorkers who live there, they get around on the subway. And they really don't need much of anything else because the subway will take them everywhere they want to go. So, you know, that's an interesting question. How do people get around? Japan, famous for its trains. I absolutely love the train system in Japan. It is so well organized, and it is the bullet trains. Oh man, these things move about 200 miles an hour, but you just feel like you're crawling because they're so big. It's like sitting in a first class seat in an airplane on just the regular seats in those. I thought, wow. It's an amazing system, but it has something to do with where they live, how they move around, you know, how they get about in society. Yeah. Did you ever stop to think of how long it was before people went faster than a horse? When was the first time that people actually started traveling faster than a horse could gallop? Yeah. In fact, yeah, even when they first came out with trains, I remember some of these stories where they actually had a race. They had a train, a locomotive race against the horse. The horse won, so people said, see, trains are worthless. You can still go faster on a horse. So it took a while even for trains, you know, to get to the point where, and yes, probably steam engines eventually brought that to pass. But just think about how recent in history that is. How recently how long in world history the fastest you could travel was by horseback. You know, we live in a very small period of time in which so much has happened. So studying mobility helps you to understand the people. How about security? How do you protect yourself in society? They say if you go to London and spend a day there, you'll probably have your picture taken at least 20 times in one day while you're there. Cameras all over the place. You know? Our country has fought typically against the idea of cameras, you know, like catching speeders or even cameras at intersections and things. Now, a lot of big intersections now have cameras. Now, frankly, part of that is so that they can track movement of cars so that the lights know when to change, right? But even that, people get mad at that because they don't like the idea of being watched, you know? And so our country has been very, very hesitant to accept the idea of cameras in public places. We don't like that. We don't like the idea of big daddy government keeping an eye on us. So that tells you something about the mentality of the people. The more collectivistic the society, the more likely they are to accept the idea of monitoring. Yeah, in Brazil, I got a really nice envelope in the mail, really nice black and white shot of the back end of my car as I went through an area and got caught, on the camera. Never saw a policeman, but I got my ticket in the mail. I had to pay it. Why do cities survive after devastating circumstances while businesses come and go? Well, the answer to that is cities are built for survival at any cost, while businesses may not be. You ever think about that? In the same city, businesses can come and go at will, but the city itself manages to survive because there's a different mentality. Cities are built to survive disasters. Businesses may not be. They're all ingredients in figuring out where you are. Let me just say this. A lot of times missionaries going to foreign fields don't stop to consider this type of stuff seriously. They're thinking one thing: we got to get the gospel to these people, and they need to know their theology and be ready to share the gospel. And if you're going to minister in another country, I'll say this, running the risk of being misunderstood. Don't be in such a big hurry to share the gospel with them that you fail to understand some of these things. If you do that, your attempts at sharing the gospel may fall flat. They may end up being fruitless, partly because you don't really understand the kind of people you're trying to communicate with. And as a result, you don't really communicate with them anyway. You think you are, but you may not be. All right? Well, we've talked before about culture versus personality, right, at the very beginning. And I just want to make a couple of comments. Remember that personality traits sometimes overcome cultural tendencies. We've seen that. And culture is defined more by what characterizes a group than what characterizes an individual within a group. So, for instance, anytime I refer to some sort of culture somewhere, just that I'm talking about a group of people. I would never refer to the American culture by saying, now this is what Isaac's like. Oh, so now I know what America's like. No, we don't do that. We always use the word culture in a group context to describe what a group of people is like. All right. Number 7 is sophisticated stereotypes. This is interesting. We must distinguish between two types of generalizations. When I say the word stereotype, does your mind give you a positive or negative impression? Negative? Why? Okay, all right, yeah. One of the reasons stereotypes are often negative is because they're so broad. Yeah. Why else are stereotypes so often negative? Yeah. All right. Oftentimes stereotypes are associated with humor and not the right kind of humor. Yeah. I mean, I could give you some stereotypes. Well, let's be adults here. Give me some stereotypes without using inappropriate language. Some stereotypes that are out there. Let's just open it up. Whether they're positive or negative, give me some. I think we did this little exercise before, but let's take a couple examples again. Stereotype. All Asians are good at math. Yeah. Where did that come from? That stereotype. Okay. All right. A lot of your better paying jobs are somehow connected with math, computers, medicine. Okay, good. So mathematics, very important in order to be successful. Give me another one. All homeschoolers what? Win spelling bees. Yeah. There's a lot of them just about homeschoolers that we could make, right? I mean, and my kids did a combination of it, but they also did homeschooling, yeah. I never did because there wasn't any such thing as homeschooling when I was in school. That's how old I is. But another one. Yeah. Dumb blondes. Yeah, where did that one come from? I don't either. Anybody know where the idea of dumb blondes came? Okay. Ah. Blame Marilyn Monroe. There. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So blondes, are dyeing their hair because they don't want to be. Yeah. Interesting. That's probably a good theory. Americans don't know geography. What's geography? Okay, yeah. Look, how many Americans can name the provinces of Canada? We won't go there, okay? How many Americans can name countries in, a significant amount of countries in South America or Central America? How many Americans know where Cuba is or the Caribbean? Or, Peru or Chile or, yeah, man. I'm guilty as charged. I really am. I'm not good with geography. Mr. Horner would not be proud of me. Good. Yeah, man. Yeah, wow. You get to some of those Northeast countries that, you're in a puzzle, they're just little tiny pieces. Yeah. Okay. So, really quick, why? Why is it that Americans, and I know it's a stereotype, okay? Why is it that Americans aren't good with geography? All right. Yeah, for that matter, nothing else besides Ohio or Iowa or wherever you're from matters, right? Okay. We are so self-sufficient. We have everything we need right where we are, so why think about someplace else? What's another reason? It's not necessary to what? Yeah. Okay, modern technology has really made it, if I'm going to travel somewhere, I don't even have to know where I'm going. I just listen to Google and I'll get there. Yeah. A few years ago, I had, I had my GPS. I was going somewhere with my wife, and we're on this road that just doesn't seem right. And all of a sudden, we drive by this huge cemetery, and the guy says, "You have arrived at your destination." Okay, is this God? Really felt awkward about that one. I had no idea where I was. Yeah, all right, interesting, yeah. Oh, up in the UP. Yeah. Speaking of stereotypes. Yeah. Yeah, my brother had a couple that I'll leave with him. Yeah, up in the UP. Give me another idea of a stereotype. Yeah. Okay, yeah. All Republicans or all Democrats are, yeah. Yep. We stereotype them. Yep. All lawyers are liars. You ever hear that one? Well, that's just not fair. I've met one that's, no, I'm just kidding. It's not a true statement, but there's a reputation, that, and unfortunately, it's too generalized. Okay, yeah. White people are rich. Yeah, the whole, if we talked about the Black Lives Matter movement or, other things like that, yeah, a lot of generalizations, stereotypes come out of that. Absolutely, on both sides of the equation. Yes. All right, so what happened? When we start talking stereotypes, immediately, most of the ones we think of are negative. It's just part of human nature, I think, in making generalizations about people. So, negative generations accounts for most of them, but B, neutral generations also exist, and they are called archetypes. Now, let's see, did we give me a stereotype that's neutral? It doesn't speak negatively. Sharon said all Asians are good at math, although even that statement can be understood negatively, okay? But can you think of a stereotype that's neutral? It's a generalization, but it doesn't cast a bad light on anybody? Yeah. Okay, all right, yeah. The stereotype of a grandma and grandpa that, yeah, the epitome of love of grandkids, yeah. Okay, yep, Southerners are hospitable, good, good. Any others? Okay, the military, people in the military just, in fact, I've talked to people that want to go into the military because they want to develop discipline. All right, good. Nothing negative about that. Yeah. Now, so these do exist. And by the way, you guys, I think you already know this. If you're talking about yourself or your own group, then it's okay to use the stereotype. But if you're talking about another group, be very, very careful. Okay? Be very, very careful. Certain ethnic groups can tease themselves by calling them certain names. But if somebody outside that ethnic group uses the same designation, thinking, oh, they use it from themselves, so it must be okay, it's not okay if you're the one that's using it. And if God takes you to another culture to live in, be careful that you don't mislearn that. You hear them talking to each other a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean you have permission to talk to them the same way. That's their in-group, okay? Like if I said, oh, this stupid Lounsborough family, and we laugh, but if you referred to my family as stupid, I might not be real happy about that. You might be right, but I might not be happy. Guidelines in evaluating cultures. Okay, here we go. So, letter A, understand cultural dimensions within the broader framework of cultural intelligence. In other words, don't forget the values that we've studied. They'll apply in this study of cultures, of clusters. Always avoid negative stereotypes. At least try. It's pretty hard. It's such an ingrained part of our being. C, treat sophisticated stereotypes or archetypes as your best first guess. In other words, if you hear a generalization about a certain people group, all right, don't completely dismiss it because there's a reason why it exists, but don't take it too far. Be very conservative in how much you understand that to be true. Okay? And D, be open to changing your assumptions. Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes that anybody makes, missionaries or anybody that goes to another culture, is once you create an assumption about that culture, it's very difficult to undo it, to change it. You have to be humble enough to say, I've been wrong in the way I've sized these people up. I need to change my attitude. Okay? I heard a guy once in Brazil, he was a missionary. He said, there is not a single honest Brazilian in this country. I mean, this guy grew up in Brazil. And he said, not a single one. And I mentioned a guy that was just a really solid testimony. In fact, he was the dean of our seminary. I said, what about him? He said, that may be one exception, but that's it. And that was, for one thing, he was an outsider. He was an American, okay? And two, he was just flat out wrong anyways, It was, I remember when I heard that, I thought, man, and he'd been in Brazil a lot longer than I had. He'd grown up there, but I thought, wow, nobody, you guys wouldn't know him. But I thought and I don't think he was interested in changing his assumptions, even though he should have known better. And maybe he did, but maybe he was just saying that in a moment of, be careful. If you say something like that in a moment of frustration, even if you don't really believe it to be true, you can't retract what you've said. E, move beyond the generalizations. In other words, when you're first getting to know a culture, you can't help but make generalizations. It's hot here. The food is like this, or those are going to happen. They're unavoidable. So as you learn to live in that culture, little by little, you begin to move beyond these generalizations. You realize, okay, it's not quite that way. These people are different, or that, and those generalizations give way to more specificity as you get to know the culture. Does that make sense? All Latin Americans are. Well, if I'm traveling Latin American countries, that may be my impression. But as I settle into Peru or Chile or something, well, these people are very different from these people right across the border. I never saw that before. Well, you couldn't see it before. But as you spend time there, then you learn that not all Spanish is Spanish, same Spanish, right? I mean, if you two ladies went to who else speaks Spanish here? If you went to Spain tomorrow, you might have a little trouble understanding the Spanish in Spain. I don't know. If I go to England, I have to listen carefully sometimes, or Scotland especially, or Ireland. I have to listen very carefully because I may not understand their English. I don't know if it's that radical in Spanish or not. I don't know if you've been to other Latin American countries and listened to the Spanish in other places besides Peru, for example. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Right. You appreciate that, having grown up in Peru. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In Brazil, if I've talked to guys that have come from Portugal. Oh, they speak Portuguese. I couldn't understand hardly anything. Or Mozambique speaks Portuguese in East Africa. But man, I don't understand them. We had a gal that was Brazilian. She was very dark Brazilian. She was sweet. I mean, she was almost my height. A tall gal, almost 6 feet tall. And she was such a neat gal. She was one of my students, and we just loved her. She helped us in our church. She was really dark as Northeast Brazilians go. And she ended up marrying a guy from Mozambique, and they live there now. And she said when she first went to visit Mozambique, they called her Clara, which means light, because the Mozambicans are so dark, so much darker than even the dark Brazilians. That's something I would never have known. But that's the type of thing we're talking about. As you live in a place longer, you begin to see the differences that you didn't perceive when you first went. All right. Cultural clusters are grouped primarily by 4 shared characteristics. And they are, if you're going to put together clusters, what would you look for? What's the most obvious one? If you're looking at cultural clusters, what's the most obvious thing that's going to define a cluster? Geography, right. And we'll see that in just a moment. I'm going to give you a map. You got one in your notes, actually. What else? Big one we talked about before. Language. Number 2 is language. Yep, very big deal. Yeah. What else? Yeah, and I'm going to use religion, but you shared values, you're right. That in religion is usually the most obvious expression of that, right? So, and some of the clusters, you'll wonder, why did that country get included in that cluster? In fact, one of the ones that we have the most challenge with is Israel. What cluster does Israel belong in? Or think of Mexico. Okay, I'm still having a hard time with this idea that Mexico is actually called geographically North America because of the way it's hooked, geographically, but culturally, it's Latin American, no doubt, very clearly. Okay, what about Egypt? Where do you put Egypt? When you think of Egypt, when I was growing up, Egypt was Middle East because it was always Egypt and Israel and the other countries, But Egypt geographically is North Africa. So there are countries like that where they actually belong in more than one category because of the political, or religious influences. There are countries whose religion spills into a neighboring country, and so they belong to the same cluster, even though they're not geographically part of that area. So religion is important. And then the last one, it might not be as obvious, history. If certain people groups have shared the same history, then and I would say this one probably comes in last place. This is probably pretty much the order that, logically, that we use to develop clusters: the geography, and language, religion, and history. Okay. Now notice that one thing that's not included here is economy. Because even in a country like ours, we have an upper, middle, and lower class. We don't study them as that. We study the North American, cluster as a cluster, even though within that cluster, there is economic diversity. That's not really a major player in determining what makes a cluster. Okay? All right, so there's the map that you have. I found a nicer one that I got. There's a site. Oh, what's the name of that site? It's been a while since I've done it. Anyway, you can design your own map. Have any of you been on a site like that where gives you a blank map and you can color it the way you want, choose the regions you want? That's what this one did. So I was able to color each of the regions on here. Oh, what's the name of that website? I should have had it on here. It's really cool. Now, 1204. All right, I'll just make a couple observations, and this is midterm week. You guys wouldn't mind having a few extra minutes. So, of course, you don't mind that regardless of what week of the semester it is, right? So tell me, which one of those clusters do you see represented in more than one geographic region? Pardon? Yeah, the Anglo. The Anglo culture, and so how many, well, the two of them are obvious, right? North America over here and Australia, okay? The one that's not so obvious is actually the one that got it all started, right? all these other blue areas are really sons and daughters of this one here, British Isles. Fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, and we'll talk about that. The British Isles actually came under Roman domination for a time under Claudius Caesar and some others. Fascinating history. Most of the other ones you'll see are pretty much contained, right? So here you see Mexico is not considered, in terms of cultural studies, it's not considered North America. It's considered Latin America, okay? Even though it's connected here, like this. Give me, what's the smallest cluster on there? Yeah, it actually includes Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and, oh dear, help me out. What's the other neighbor there? There goes my geography, Pam, right out the window. I don't have my cheat sheet here, I'm in trouble. Anyway, that is the smallest one, and the largest portion of it is Germany. And so that's why it's called the Germanic cluster. Now, having said that, be careful. If somebody's from Austria, they don't want to be called German. So I'm not saying that they all, oh yeah, it doesn't matter, we're all the same. No. There are similarities, but not to that point. What's the largest one? Yeah, it's really called the Eastern European Central Asian cluster. It takes in a bunch. And we'll talk when we get to that one about why that is, why it includes such a diversity. Notice it even takes in Turkey, and yeah, that's the biggest one. So there are 10 of them altogether. And again, not everybody is going to necessarily agree on the grouping of these, but I think we'll find that it's pretty close. At least it gives you an idea of how clusters function in the world. And with that, if you don't mind, I'll give you a few extra minutes to stretch or get something to eat, and we'll see you all on Thursday.